Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you're here and I'm so glad you clicked on today's video. We're doing a super fun and laid back type of video today. I'm going to be sharing all of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. So we're talking all of my 5-star reads, and then I'm also including my 4.5-star reads because to me they're like some of my favorite books I've read so far this year. So I wanted to include them in today's video. I know a lot of people are doing their mid-year wrap-up. If you guys would like to see a video dedicated to every single book I've read this year, comment down below, let me know, because I will totally do that. But I thought it'd be really fun to touch base on the books that I love the most and the books that I've been obsessing over, the books I can't get out of my mind, my favorite books basically. I have quite a few. We have quite a few favorite books this year, which is super exciting for me. I have 11 books in total to share with you. This year, one of my New Year's resolutions, one of my goals was to be a little bit more stricter when it came to rating books. When I started my booktube channel, I would literally rate every book 5 stars. I'm not even kidding. Every book I read was a 5-star. I was obsessed with it. I loved it, which I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I was just really enjoying all the books I was reading at the time, but I've definitely grown as a reader. I have found things that I like and don't like when it comes to reading, and I feel like my rating system this year has definitely been a little bit more strict and harsher. But for me, that's amazing because I know that the books I'm about to share with you guys are books that I genuinely love, enjoyed, would reread over and over again. Before we hop into talking about my favorite books though, I quickly want to share with you guys my book journal. I recently updated it and it made it super cute and fun. I just want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, which is Notion. I thought this would be the perfect time to give you guys a little tour of my Notion and how I use it in my day-to-day life, but also show you guys a new feature you can use on Notion called Notion Sites. And basically you can publish your own website through Notion now. I was super excited when I saw Notion launch this because I have been thinking for probably the past year now of starting up my own blog, and I feel like this was just a sign to finally jump on it and do it. Notion Sites makes web publishing so easy and simple. You don't need to use any coding skills or anything like that. You can literally get a website up and running within minutes using their building blocks. They have templates you can choose from. They also offer Notion AI that can help you fill in the blanks of your website when you need help. So for my Notion site, I decided to start a personal blog called Ray of Happiness. This is basically the place where you'll find all of my favorite things, but eventually I would start to love linking clothing that I love, makeup that I love, and then I only have one blog post up right now, but it's my favorite books of 2024 so far. And as you scroll through, it's just my 5-star reads of the year so far. I've been using Notion for the past few years. I used it throughout college, and then even being outside of college now, I still use it in my day-to-day life. So first up, we have my planner. This is my overall planner that I use for everyday life. I use it to do daily planning, weekly planning, monthly planning. I actually got this planner off of Etsy and I am just obsessed with it. This right here is like my main view. This is what I'm looking at all day long. So this page I love. It is so pretty and aesthetically pleasing to look at. We have some cute little quotes here. We have the time, we have another calendar, we have some fun happy music. I also use it as my book journal, and this is probably my favorite template I use on Notion. It is so cute, so aesthetic, and it quite literally has everything when it comes to having a reading journal. My reading goal according to my book journal right now is 50 books this year. I'm currently reading Love Unwritten by Lauren Asher. Web publishing can be so complicated and time consuming, but with Notion sites you literally can get your website up and running within minutes. Notion keeps it super easy for us too. All the publishing tools are in one place, so that means all your sites and domains are in one place. You can easily access them and manage them whenever you want. Publishing a site is as easy as clicking one button with Notion, and it is so fun. Also, the limit does not exist, so you can create as many sites as you'd like with Notion. So if you'd like to start up your own blog or start up your own reading blog where you can share all your book reviews with people, you can try Notion sites for free and access their premium features for $12 a month using the link in my description. Notion is so much fun to use and it's so customizable. You can really make your pages into anything you'd like. I'll also have my blog linked down below for you guys if you want to stay up to date with it, see what I post. But thank you so much to Notion for sponsoring today's video, and without further ado, let's hop into the video. I'm gonna start with my 5-star reads, and we're gonna go in order of what I read first this year. Starting off, the first 5-star read of 2024. It's not a surprise. To be completely honest, I am so late to the game with this book. We have Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. So late to the game, guys. I know so many of you have already read this. This book came out a few years ago, right around when I was actually starting my booktube channel, and it was a very popular book talk book. Everybody was raving about it. It was literally everywhere. At the time, I was so scared of book talk, guys. I was literally terrified. I don't know why, because now some of my favorite books are book talk books, but at the time I kind of stayed away from book talk books because I think I read one or two that were just so overly hyped and I couldn't figure out why. I just didn't enjoy them as much as everybody else did. So for a while I kind of shied away from book talk books. It's a book that so many of you have recommended to me. You guys have been pushing me to read this book for the past few years. I finally picked it up. I read it. I sobbed. It was emotional. I understand the hype behind this book and I understand why so many people love and adore this. This is a very cutie, sweet little YA rom-com, and our main character Liz is someone who has gone through a death in the family, and there's a lot of talk of grief in this story. I sobbed a lot during this read, which really surprised me because I didn't know going into it was going to be such a heavy emotional read. It did end up making me cry a few times, which is kind of rare. I don't usually cry when I read books, so the fact that this pulled emotion out of me right away, I knew it was going to be a high rating. Anyways, our main character is Liz, and basically she's in high school. She's getting ready for her high school prom. It's supposed to be like best, most magical night of her life. A boy who used to live, I think, in the same neighborhood as her, he moved away when they were younger. He ends up moving back during their senior year. Liz is doing whatever she can to get this boy to go to the prom with her. What ends up happening is she enlists her next door neighbor Wes into basically helping her get this boy to go to the prom with her, and Liz and Wes kind of have a little bit of an enemies vibe going on. Over the past few years, they've kind of just grown up pranking each other and doing little things that kind of push each other's buttons. Originally, when they were younger, they were very close friends. I think you can almost say that this is like a friends to enemies to friends to lovers vibe. Of course, Wes has some stipulations, but he ends up agreeing to helping Liz get the boy she likes to go to the prom with her, and along the way they kind of fall into a little bit of a fake dating scheme. Absolutely adorable. I loved every second of their story. I think Wes was such a sweetheart throughout the entire story. The actual title of this book, Better Than the Movies, is so adorable. Basically throughout the story, Liz shares little bits and pieces from her past. Liz is basically referencing those rom-coms that she watched when she was younger. I honestly thought that was one of the best parts of this book. If you're a big rom-com type of person, you'll eat this up. Every chapter begins with a quote from a popular rom-com. We have Pretty Woman in here, we have When Harry Met Sally, we have Notting Hill, Sweet Home Alabama, and just so many other amazing movies. And then the last thing I'll share with you guys, and why this ended up being a 5-star read for me, the character development in this is absolutely amazing. In the beginning of this, Liz is definitely struggling with her grief and moving on. She's struggling with having someone new in her home. Kind of watch her go back and forth with it the entire story, and by the end she is starting to really work on it, and we see so much growth with her. This was beautifully done, beautifully written. I can understand the hype behind it. I'm so excited for the sequel to come out. I think it's coming out pretty soon, actually. I know people have started getting arcs for it. The sequel of this book is basically following Liz after the prom, I think when she goes away to college, stuff like that. So I feel like it's gonna be really fun to kind of get that follow-up on her and who she's with and her life and what's going on. Better Than the Movies, 5 stars, absolutely beautiful. This is easily one of my favorite YA books I think I've ever read. The next books I rated 5 stars in 2024 are actually a part of a series, and I read them back to back. So I read book 1 and then right after I jumped into book 2. These are extremely long books. They are books that have been on my shelf for the longest time, which I think is so funny because Better Than the Movies was on my shelf for a few years. These books were also on my shelf for a few years, and I finally got around to them and they ended up being 5-star reads. So if you take anything away from this video, video, maybe take away to try out those books that have been on your shelf for a few years, because they might just end up being your favorite books ever. The next 5-star reads of 2024 are Binding 13 and Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh. This is book 1 and book 2 of the Boys of Tommen series. These are actually special editions I just received from Eternal Embers, and I am so happy I was able to get my hands on these. These are very chunky books with very tiny text on the pages, and that just terrified the heck out of me because I knew going into it was gonna be a very long read. I felt like it was gonna take me a whole month to read one book. I also didn't know going into it if I was gonna enjoy the books a lot. If I didn't enjoy them in the beginning, I didn't know what I was gonna do because I don't really like to DNF books. Luckily, these books sucked me in immediately. First chapter, I was immediately sucked in. Book 1 and book 2 follow the stories of Shannon Lynch and Johnny Kavanagh. The story takes place in Ireland, I want to say in the early 2000s, maybe like 2004-ish. Our main character that we follow the majority of the story is Shannon Lynch. She comes from a very tough at-home life. She comes from an abusive at-home life, and the whole story really follows her navigating her tough at-home life, but also navigating at school. Before she ended up at Tommen, she was actually at a different school where she was getting severely bullied. She was getting harassed daily and just having all of these problems. Eventually, enough was enough, and she ended up getting pulled out of that school and being sent to Tommen, which is where our MMC Johnny Kavanagh is attending. Johnny is like the school star. He's a rugby star. He's basically guaranteed after graduation to go pro and like go play rugby professionally. So everybody knows who he is. Everybody loves him, adores him. He's super popular. All the girls like him, and he's just like the complete opposite of Shannon. It's honestly like a little meet cute that they have, and after their meet cute, a lot of stuff happens, a lot of craziness. Johnny is basically told to stay as far away from Shannon as possible, but obviously we know what happens. Throughout the rest of the story, Johnny and Shannon are just kind of thrown in each other's orbit. No matter how hard they try to stay away from each other, they're constantly being thrown together. It's honestly so adorable. It kind of reminds me of Invisible String by Taylor Swift. I feel like that is one of their songs in the story because no matter what, I feel like there's always like a string tying them together. There's just so many cute little things that happen in this story, from making mixtapes for each other to playing video games together. There's just all these adorable little moments between the two of them. There's a lot of moments where Johnny is kind of stepping up as the hero and taking care of Shannon, and it is just so beautiful. It's another tearjerker, I'm not gonna lie. Sobbed like a baby during Binding and Keeping 13. It's mainly because there's a lot of like heavy, sensitive topics that are talked about in this series. These books ended up being, I think, some of the most beautiful books I've ever read. I think the way Chloe Walsh wrote about these sensitive topics was so spot on and just so well done, and I feel like so many people out there who maybe went through similar things can find a lot of peace within these books, also connect with them on so many levels. I know that was a really big thing for me while reading these. Book 2 continues on their story, but we're kind of just diving deeper into like all the craziness that's happening around them. The way that book 1 leaves off is probably one of the craziest like cliffhanger endings I've ever read. That's coming from somebody who's read Sarah J Maas. These books are so good that I'm already thinking about rereading them this year. Aside from the romance in it and Johnny being like the ultimate hero in these books, another thing I really enjoyed is the found family trope in here. You really fall in love with like all the side characters that are mentioned in these books, and as you continue on in the series, the books start to follow the other side characters from these two. It's a lot of fun, it's a lot of craziness, and it's a lot of pages, but it is worth every single word. It's worth every single page. These books are absolutely beautiful. I literally could not recommend these enough. I want to say if you're going to take any books away from this video, it would probably be the Boys of Tommen books, mainly because they just impacted my life so much after reading them, so I feel like everybody has to read them. Next book I read that ended up being 5 stars is Funny Story by Emily Henry. This is a very big surprise because if you know, you know. Emily Henry has never really been a favorite author of mine. I've always found it really hard to get through her books, connect with her books, and a lot of the time I just would get bored with them. I've picked up Funny Story this year when it came out, and I ended up falling madly in love with this story and these characters. The whole premise of it is honestly comical. Our main FMC is Daphne, and basically she is preparing for a wedding, and her fiance ends up breaking off the wedding and breaking off the engagement and kicking Daphne out of their home, all because he tells Daphne that he's actually in love with his best friend. His best friend, though, also happens to be in a relationship at the time, so she breaks off her relationship with her boyfriend, who is our MMC Miles. And that's honestly not even the craziest part. The craziest part is that Daphne ends up living with Miles for the time being. She quite literally has nowhere else to go. She's currently working at a library, and she has to stay there for a certain amount of time before she can leave, so she ends up staying with Miles for a little bit. I thought this was a really fun and different type of story. Never really read anything quite like it, so after reading it and just loving how it all ended up and how it played out, I could honestly see why so many people adore Emily Henry, because her writing style in this book specifically was just so funny to me. I thought it was really cute, it was funny, it was witty, it got emotional at times. Our MMC Miles was an absolute heartthrob in my opinion. I feel like he was just always doing the sweetest things for Daphne. They both kind of came into each other's lives at the perfect time. I also really love the title Funny Story, because it's basically a funny story about how Daphne and Miles met. The last book that I've recently rated 5 stars is Reckless by Lauren Roberts. I'm sure you guys aren't even surprised. I raved about Powerless last year. It was one of my favorite reads of 2023. As soon as Reckless came out, I immediately started it. I was so excited for this follow-up to Powerless, because Powerless does end kind of on a cliffhanger, and you're wondering like how everything's gonna play out between Peyton and Kai. So Reckless is continuing on the story of Peyton. Peyton is currently on the run, and Kai, being the enforcer, is chasing after her. This was so freaking amazing, guys. Like the way it ends too. And now I have to wait till April to get the final book in the series, and I have no idea what's gonna happen, because the way that this book ended, literally jaw on the floor. I cannot believe the way this story ended. Absolutely crazy, especially because this entire story is like a roller coaster to begin with. They both keep getting into these life or death situations. Kai's big dilemma in the story is his brother and his kingdom. This is just a roller coaster, and I loved every second of it. If you haven't read Powerless yet, I highly recommend it. It gives off Hunger Game vibes, but the romance is like 10 times better in my opinion. And then obviously if you've read Powerless and you haven't read Reckless, read Reckless, guys. It is amazing, and I feel like Lauren Roberts really gave us everything that we wanted as the readers. It was so good. Next up, we are going to talk about the books that I rated 4.5 stars this year. These are books that almost made it to the 5-star rating, but they were just missing a little something. Starting off, we have Belladonna and Foxglove by Adeline Grace. These are books that I never ever thought I would pick up. I'm not even kidding you guys. And what originally drew me to pick up Belladonna, which is book 1, I'm a part of Owl Crate, which is a fantasy book subscription. A few of the items I've gotten every month from Owl Crate are actually Belladonna inspired, and so I get these cute little knickknacks that were inspired by Belladonna, and I was just like obsessed with them and drawn to them, and eventually I was like, you know what, I have to pick up Belladonna and see what this book is about. This is basically a gothic romantasy. I don't think I've ever read like gothic reads, so going into this I was a little nervous. I didn't know what exactly to expect. Long story short, I picked this book up and I quite literally did not put it down. I read this in one sitting. I pulled an all-nighter, and I was obsessed with every second of this. Our main character is Signa, and she's basically an orphan who has lived with multiple families, and right away this kind of reminded me of a series of unfortunate events. I feel like Signa's life is a series of unfortunate events. I'm not even kidding. She was an orphan who lived with many different families, and basically wherever she went, death kind of followed her, and the people that she would stay with would always end up dying somehow. It was really weird. So right away, Signa despises death. She can't stand him. She just wants him to stay away from her and the people she loves. It gets to a point though for Signa where she's able to communicate with ghosts and see them, and then she's able to communicate with death, which is quite frankly impossible in Death's sense. He doesn't understand why this girl can see him and communicate with him, but that's like the main premise of the book. Death is following Signa everywhere and she doesn't know why. She despises him. After her last home arrangement kind of falls through, it doesn't work out, she ends up moving in with her uncle, I believe. I think it's like her uncle and cousins, and she ends up living in this beautiful manor, and while she's staying there, she ends up finding herself in the middle of like this murder mystery that she's trying to uncover. I think that was the part of the book that I really enjoyed and kind of latched onto, because I wasn't expecting like a murder mystery to come out of this, and it ended up being so much fun. And the way that Death kind of helps Signa along the way is just so fascinating, and their whole relationship and dynamic throughout the story is really cool. Book 1 is so much fun. The enemies to lovers vibes are amazing. Following Belladonna, I immediately jumped into Foxglove, which is book 2, and this is continuing on Signa's story after Belladonna. Foxglove is actually the name of Signa's manor that she inherited from her parents, and when she gets there, she finds that the manor is actually haunted. So much fun. I can't go too in depth because I don't want to spoil anything, but if you haven't picked up these books yet, highly recommend. I really love that Death is a person in these books. You eventually get to learn that Fate is a person in these books. The storyline overall is just so cool. It's so fun. And book 3, which is Wisteria, that is actually coming out in August, I believe, and I am so excited for that book. The way the ending of this book sets up the beginning of Wisteria, I can tell that book is probably going to be the 5-star for me. The next books we have are part of the Rebel Blue Ranch novels. We have Done and Dusted and Swift and Saddled. These are by Lila Sage, and when I first read these, I think I ended up rating them 4 stars, but honestly, I'm kind of leaning towards 5 stars just because these were such fun and adorable cowboy romances. I don't know what I expected going into these books, but it wasn't what I got when I was reading them, and I loved every second of them. Book 1 is all about Emmy and Luke. Emmy basically grew up on a farm riding horses and competing. Eventually Emmy grows up and she decides to leave her small town in Wyoming and go ride professionally, and then something very tragic happens that kind of pulls Emmy back to her small town, to her ranch. When she gets there, she finds that her childhood like frenemy, I guess you could say, is working as a ranch hand. That is our MMC Luke Brooks. He's the best friend to Emmy's older brother and is helping him around the ranch. When Emmy gets home though, her and Luke kind of fall back into their like little frenemies dynamic. They're kind of pushing each other's buttons, getting on each other's nerves. Their whole story is absolutely adorable. The cowboy vibes are amazing. The small town vibes are amazing. I also really liked that Luke was the best friend to Emmy's older brother because Emmy was kind of off limits to Luke. So you get a little bit of a forbidden romance in here too. He doesn't want to go behind his best friend's back, but he also is falling for his little sister. So I really like that storyline. I don't read them often, but when I do, I really enjoy them. Following that, I jumped into Swift and Saddled. This follows Ada and Weston. Basically in this story, Weston is trying to remodel this part of the ranch. He wants to make it into a cute bed and breakfast where tourists can come and explore their property and see how nice small town living is. Ada is our FMC, who is a city girl. She ends up trading in her city home for Rebel Blue Ranch, and there she's basically helping Weston do the interior designing for his bed and breakfast. I really like this because we get a little bit of a Grumpy Meets Sunshine in here. Weston gives off golden retriever vibes while Ada kind of gives off black cat vibes. We see a lot of little things kind of happen and spark between the two of them, and it is just so adorable. I feel like Lila Sage has a very like easygoing and addicting writing style because I read both of these books in one sitting. I couldn't put them down. I was so into them. They're just like fun, witty cowboy romances. Book 3 is actually going to be an enemies to lovers, and it's supposed to be about the oldest Ryder brother and Emmy's best friend, and it seems like we're getting a little bit of an enemies to lovers in there. Next up, we have Powerful by Lauren Roberts. This is just a cutie little novella, and it actually tells the story of Adina, who is Peyton's best friend. If you read Powerless, you'll know all about Adina. Honestly, I was crying before I even started this book. I said this when I was reading Powerless, but Adina is probably one of the most selfless and sweetest characters I've ever read about. She just wanted to do everything for everyone, no matter what position she was in. Powerful is all about Dina. It's her story and basically what is happening to her while Peyton is at the castle and going through the trials. Usually I don't rate novellas high just because they're novellas. They're smaller, there's not a lot to them, but I feel like in this one specifically, we got everything we wanted and more. I feel like Lauren Roberts did a really, really good job with her story, and I'm excited to see like what happens in the next novella, what happens in the next book, because after reading this one, I feel like I have a lot of theories about like what could happen and the connections. So the last book I have is The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a book that I actually changed my rating for. I went from a 3.5-star rating to a 4-star rating. This is a book that when I was reading it, I went into it thinking there was going to be more romance in it. There ended up being not as much romance as I was hoping for, but the overall storyline, the politics of this world was just so fascinating to me. I ended up changing the rating because I think the overall storyline was so fun and so cool, and again, the politics of this world is really interesting. Our main character is Jude, and she's basically thrown into this world of fairies, and she doesn't know what to do because they all despise her because she's human. The story is basically following her navigating her life living in the fairy world, being hated by fairies, being tricked by fairies, and betrayed by them. There's a lot of bad and scary things happening in the kingdom too, and the story basically follows Jude trying to figure out how she can save the people she loves. And then our MMC is Carden. He's the prince in the story, and in the beginning, him and Jude definitely get off to a rocky start. You can tell that they absolutely despise each other. There are so many things that Carden does to Jude in this story where I'm just like they are despicable, unthinkable things, and I'm like, how is this gonna work out? This entire story was so crazy, but it was fun. It was very magical. So yeah, I ended up changing the rating to this because I really enjoyed it. One of my favorite things to do lately is actually look up fan art for this book specifically on TikTok, Instagram, stuff like that, because there's some really beautiful fan art out there. A lot of people say as you go on through the series, it actually picks up a lot more and the romance gets really, really good. I have had like a few little things kind of spoiled for me here and there just because of Pinterest and stuff like that, but from what I've seen, I'm really, really excited to continue on the series and see what happens. That is all for my favorite reads of 2024 so far. We went through 11 books in total. I have to say overall this year has already been so much fun. I've read so many great books. I found so many new authors that I'm in love with. I'm really excited to see what happens in the next few months and what we finish the year off with. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you saw one of your favorite books in this video, let me know down below which one it was and why you loved it so much. I probably will do a mid-year wrap-up of all the books I've read so far, and then I'll probably also do an end of the year TBR. There's so many new releases coming out that are very high on my TBR, so very, very excited for that. With all that being said though, I love you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one.